The stagecoach rattled into Williams, Arizona territory, on a blistering afternoon in July of 1882. Carrying a woman who would never speak a word yet would change everything about the life of rancher Robert Zimmerman. Robert stood on the wooden sidewalk outside the general store, his weathered hands gripping the post as he watched the coach pull to a dusty stop. He had placed the advertisement 6 months ago, half drunk and lonely after another winter alone on his ranch. The replies had been few, but one had stood out. The handwriting was careful and precise, the words honest but sparse. What had caught his attention most was a single line near the end. "I cannot speak, but I can listen, work hard, and will be faithful." At 32 years old, Robert had built his ranch from nothing after the war. He had fought for the Union, come west with a few dollars and a dream, and carved out a life in the Arizona territory that was respectable if solitary. His dark hair had started showing threads of gray at the temples, and his blue eyes had seen enough hardship to appreciate simple honesty when he found it. The stage driver helped a young woman down, and Robert felt his breath catch. She was small, perhaps 5 feet and 3 inches tall, with auburn hair pinned neatly beneath a simple bonnet. Her dress was plain calico, faded but clean and carefully mended. She carried a single worn carpetbag and stood very still, her green eyes scanning the unfamiliar street with a mixture of fear and determination. Robert walked forward, removing his hat. "Miss Eleanor Morrison." She turned toward him, and those green eyes met his directly. She nodded once, then reached into a small reticule at her wrist and produced a folded paper. Her hand shook slightly as she offered it to him. He took it carefully, noting how delicate her fingers were, how her nails were trimmed short and practical. The note was written in the same precise handwriting as her letters. "Mr. Zimmerman, I am Eleanor Morrison. Thank you for allowing me to come. I will do my best to be a good wife to you. I hope my inability to speak will not be too great a burden. I read and write well and understand everything said to me." Robert looked up from the note to find her watching him anxiously. There was something in her expression, a vulnerability mixed with courage, that moved him deeply. "Miss Morrison," he said gently, "I told you in my letters that your condition does not trouble me. A person does not need words to be honest or kind. I hope you will find my ranch to your liking and that we can build a good life together." Her shoulders relaxed slightly, and the smallest smile touched her lips. She nodded again, more firmly this time. "We should see the preacher before we head out to the ranch," Robert continued, "unless you would like some time to rest or reconsider." Eleanor shook her head quickly and reached for her small pad of paper and pencil. She wrote rapidly, "I am ready now. I have thought about nothing else for months." Robert felt warmth spread through his chest. "All right then, let me take your bag." The wedding was simple, conducted by Preacher Matthews in the small church on the edge of town. The preacher's wife and the shopkeeper served as witnesses. Eleanor could not speak her vows, but she wrote them out beforehand, and the preacher read them aloud while she nodded her agreement. When it came time, Robert slipped a simple gold band on her finger, one that had belonged to his mother. He had brought it west after the war, never thinking he would use it. "You may kiss your bride," the preacher said with a kind smile. Robert looked at Eleanor, seeking permission. She met his eyes and nodded slightly, her cheeks coloring. He leaned down and pressed a gentle kiss to her lips, brief and chaste, but enough to seal their union. As they walked to his wagon, Eleanor stopped suddenly and turned to him. She pointed to a small cafe across the street, then to both of them, her eyebrows raised in question. "You are asking if we should eat before the ride home," Robert guessed. She nodded, smiling. "That is a fine idea. The ranch is 2 hours away, and I confess I have not had a proper meal all day." They sat across from each other at a small table by the window. Eleanor studied the menu carefully, then pointed to the chicken and dumplings. Robert ordered the same, along with coffee and pie for after. While they waited for their food, Robert found himself studying his new wife. She had removed her bonnet, and he could see that her auburn hair caught the afternoon light beautifully. Her skin was fair with a dusting of freckles across her nose. Her hands rested folded on the table, and he noticed old scars on her fingers, the kind that came from sewing or perhaps working in a factory. "Can I ask you something?" he said quietly. "You do not have to answer if it troubles you." Eleanor looked at him directly and nodded. "Were you born unable to speak, or did something happen?" Her expression grew distant for a moment, and pain flickered in her eyes. She reached for her paper and pencil, which she kept close always, and began to write. When she finished, she slid the paper across to him. "I was 7 years old. My father drank heavily and had a terrible temper. One night he hurt my mother badly. I screamed and screamed. He grabbed me by the throat to silence me. Something broke inside. I have never made a sound since. The doctors in Philadelphia said the damage was permanent. My father went to prison. My mother died 2 years later. I was raised by my aunt who passed last year. I had no one and nothing left. Your advertisement seemed like a new beginning." Robert felt rage and sorrow war within him. He reached across the table and gently took her hand. "I am sorry you suffered that. No child should endure such things. I promise you this, Eleanor. I will never raise a hand to you in anger. I will never give you cause to fear me. You have my word as a man and as your husband." Tears filled her eyes, but she did not let them fall. She squeezed his hand in return, and the look she gave him was so full of gratitude and hope that he felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. This woman had trusted him with her life. He would not fail her. The meal arrived and they ate in comfortable silence. Robert found himself appreciating that Eleanor did not seem to need constant chatter. She ate with good manners but clear appetite, and she smiled at him over her coffee cup in a way that made his heart beat faster. The ride to the ranch was pleasant. The summer heat was beginning to fade as the sun lowered, and the desert landscape stretched out around them in shades of red and gold. Robert pointed out landmarks as they went, and Eleanor watched everything with keen interest, occasionally touching his arm to point at a hawk or a bloom of desert flowers. When the ranch came into view, Robert felt a flutter of nervousness. It was not much, just a sturdy house he had built himself, a barn, a couple of outbuildings and corrals for his horses and cattle. He ran about 200 head on his land, which stretched for several sections in all directions. "It is not fancy," he said as they approached, "but it is solid and paid for. I have a good well, and the house stays cool in summer and warm in winter." Eleanor was already scrambling down from the wagon before he could help her. She walked toward the house with her hands clasped together, then turned to him with such a radiant smile that he felt 10 feet tall. She ran back to the wagon and grabbed her pad. "It is beautiful. It is more than I ever dreamed of having. Thank you for bringing me here." Robert grinned. "Let me show you inside." The house was simple but well built. There was a main room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen area with a good stove, a bedroom, and a small room he used for storage. Everything was neat, if a bit sparse. Robert had never had a talent for making a place homey. Eleanor walked through slowly, touching things gently. The table, the chairs, the curtains he had bought from a widow in town. When she reached the bedroom, she paused in the doorway. There was only one bed, which they both knew they would share, though Robert had already decided he would give her time to adjust. She turned to him, and he saw the question in her eyes. "We are married," he said gently, "but we can take our time with everything else." I want you to feel safe here, Eleanor. Always. She studied him for a long moment, then wrote, "You are a good man, Robert Zimmerman. I am glad I came." That first evening set the pattern for their early days together. Eleanor proved to be an excellent cook, far better than Robert. She took over the kitchen immediately, inventorying his sparse supplies and writing a list of things they would need from town. She cleaned and organized with quiet efficiency, never making him feel inadequate, but simply making everything better. Robert continued his work on the ranch, tending his cattle and horses, mending fences, and managing the endless tasks that came with running a spread alone. He had a hired hand, a young Mexican man named Diego, who came 3 days a week to help with the heavier work. When Diego arrived 2 days after Eleanor, he was surprised but polite. "Boss, you got married." "I did. This is my wife, Eleanor. She cannot speak, but she understands everything. Treat her with respect." "Of course, boss. Congratulations." Diego removed his hat and nodded to Eleanor, who smiled and waved. The days fell into a rhythm. Robert rose before dawn and did his morning chores. Eleanor rose at the same time and made breakfast, substantial and delicious. They ate together, and Robert found himself talking more than he had in years, telling her about the ranch, his plans, his past. She listened with complete attention, her expressive eyes asking questions, showing concern, reflecting joy. In the evenings after supper, they would sit together. Sometimes Robert read aloud from the newspapers he got in town, or from one of his few books. Eleanor sewed or mended, her needle flashing in the lamplight. Sometimes she would write him little notes about her day, about things she had noticed, and he found himself looking forward to these written conversations. At night, they shared the bed, but Robert kept to his side, giving her space. He was aware of her presence constantly, the soft sound of her breathing, the warmth of her body near his. He wanted her, more with each passing day, but he would not rush her. 3 weeks into their marriage, everything changed. Robert came in for lunch to find Eleanor standing at the window, her body tense. She turned when she heard him and quickly wrote, "3 men rode by slowly an hour ago. They looked at the house for a long time. Something felt wrong." Robert felt ice in his gut. "Did they approach the house?" She shook her head. "Did you recognize them?" She shook her head again and wrote, "But one had a scar across his face. They all wore guns." Robert knew who she meant. Cade Rowlands and his brothers, Bill and Jack. They were trouble, drifters who had been hanging around Williams for a few months, doing odd jobs but mostly drinking and causing problems. Cade had the scar, a nasty one that ran from his eye to his jaw. "Lock the doors when I am not here," Robert said firmly. "Keep my rifle by the door." "Do you know how to shoot?" Eleanor nodded and wrote, "My aunt's husband taught me before he died. I am not a good shot, but I can manage." "Good. I do not trust those men. They have been looking for easy opportunities." That night, Robert checked all the locks twice and made sure the rifle and his pistol were loaded. Eleanor watched him with worried eyes, and when they went to bed, she moved closer to him than she ever had before. He could feel her trembling slightly. "I will keep you safe," he murmured. "I promise." She reached for his hand in the darkness and held it tightly. They fell asleep that way, fingers intertwined. 2 days later, Robert had to ride out to check on his cattle in the far pasture. Diego was helping in the near fields, but it still meant leaving Eleanor alone for several hours. He did not like it, but the work had to be done. "I will be back before dark," he told her. "Diego is close if you need anything. Fire 2 shots if there is trouble, and we will both come running." Eleanor nodded, but her eyes were anxious. She handed him a note. "Be careful." He kissed her forehead impulsively, then her lips, more lingering than ever before. "I will." Robert was in the far pasture, counting heads and checking the water source when he heard the shots. Two cracks echoing across the desert. His blood ran cold. He spurred his horse into a gallop, racing back toward the ranch house with his heart pounding in terror. He saw Diego running from the near field, his own rifle in hand. They reached the yard at nearly the same time. The front door was hanging open. Robert leaped from his horse and rushed inside, calling Eleanor's name. The house was empty. The kitchen showed signs of a struggle. A chair was overturned and Eleanor's notepad lay on the floor, a single word scrawled across it in frantic letters. Cade. No, Robert breathed. He turned to Diego, who had followed him in. Rollins took her. Get the horses. We are going after them now. I will get help from town, Diego said. That is faster. No time. Every minute matters. We ride now. You can track. Yes, boss. They followed the trail easily at first. 3 horses, riding hard toward the rocky hills northeast of the ranch. The Rollins brothers were not trying to hide their tracks, likely because they thought Robert was too far away to respond quickly. They had underestimated how fast he would ride and how desperate he would be. As the sun began to set, they found the camp. It was in a small canyon, sheltered by rocks. Robert and Diego left their horses a quarter-mile away and crept closer on foot. Robert had his rifle, Diego his own weapon. They moved silently, using every bit of cover. Robert spotted Eleanor first, and rage such as he had never known flooded through him. She was tied to a tree, her dress torn at the shoulder, her face showing a bruise on her cheek. The 3 Rollins brothers were sitting around a fire, drinking and laughing. Cade was the one talking. Once we have our fun, we will ransom her back to that fool rancher, if he wants her back. If not, we can sell her in Mexico. Robert saw red. He stood up from his hiding place, rifle raised. Let her go. Now. The 3 men scrambled for their guns, but Robert fired first. His shot hit Cade in the shoulder, spinning him around. Diego fired at the same moment, hitting Bill in the leg. Jack dove for cover behind a rock. Next shot kills, Robert roared. Untie her now, or I swear you will all die here. You are outnumbered, Cade snarled, clutching his bleeding shoulder. I am angry, and I am a better shot than all 3 of you combined, Robert replied coldly. Test me if you want. There was a long, tense moment. Then Jack raised his hands. All right, we were just having fun. We will let her go. Untie her. Move slowly. Jack edged toward Eleanor and untied the ropes binding her to the tree. She stumbled forward and Robert caught her with one arm, never lowering his rifle. She buried her face against his chest, shaking. Eleanor, are you hurt beyond the bruise? He asked urgently. She shook her head against his chest. Did they touch you improperly? She shook her head again. Relief made him weak for a moment, but his anger did not fade. Mount up, he told Diego. We are taking them to the sheriff in Williams. You are taking us in, Cade laughed harshly. Good luck proving anything. I do not need luck. I have a witness and a torn dress and evidence of kidnapping. You will hang. The laughter died. Robert kept his rifle trained on them while Diego collected their guns. They bound the 3 men's hands and made them walk ahead of the horses all the way back to town, a journey that took most of the night. Eleanor rode in front of Robert on his horse, his arm around her waist, holding her close. She trembled for the first hour, then gradually relaxed against him, her head resting on his shoulder. I was terrified I would lose you, he murmured. I have never been so scared in my life. She reached for his hand and squeezed it, then brought it to her lips and kissed his knuckles. The gesture spoke volumes. The sheriff in Williams took the Rollins brothers into custody immediately. Eleanor wrote out her testimony in clear, precise detail. The torn dress and the bruise on her face were evidence enough. The sheriff assured them the men would stand trial and almost certainly hang for kidnapping. By the time Robert and Eleanor made it back to the ranch, dawn was breaking. They were both exhausted, but Robert insisted on checking her over carefully. The bruise on her face was darkening, and there were rope burns on her wrists, but otherwise she was unharmed. "I should have been there," he said, his voice breaking. "I should have protected you." Eleanor grabbed her pad quickly and wrote, "You did protect me. You came for me. You saved me. I knew you would. I was frightened, but I never doubted you would come. If they had hurt you worse, if I had been too late." She put her fingers over his lips, stopping him. Then she wrote again, "You are not too late. I am safe because of you. You are my hero, Robert." He pulled her into his arms and held her tightly, feeling her warmth, her heartbeat, the reality of her safe in his embrace. She wrapped her arms around his neck and held him just as fiercely. When they finally pulled apart, Robert cupped her face gently, careful of the bruise. "I love you, Eleanor. I did not plan to fall so fast or so hard, but I love you. Your courage, your kindness, your strength. The way you look at me like I am better than I am. I love you." Tears spilled down her cheeks, and she grabbed her pad with shaking hands. "I love you too. From the first moment you were kind to me. I love you with all my heart." He kissed her then, deeply and thoroughly, and she responded with equal passion. When he lifted her in his arms and carried her to their bedroom, she did not protest. She helped him with the buttons of her dress, and he was gentle with her, showing her with his body what words could not fully express. They came together as true husband and wife, and it was tender and sweet and right. Afterwards, as they lay tangled together, Robert traced patterns on her bare shoulder and felt complete in a way he never had before. Eleanor curled against him, her head on his chest, and he felt her smile. "We are going to have a good life together," he promised. "I am going to make sure you are happy every single day." She reached for the pad she had brought to the bedside and wrote, "I am already happy. You make me happy. This makes me happy. Everything about our life makes me happy." The months that followed were the best of Robert's life. Eleanor transformed the ranch house into a home. With curtains she sewed herself, wildflowers in jars on the table, and the constant smell of good cooking. She tended a garden she started behind the house, growing vegetables and herbs. She learned the ranch work quickly and often helped Robert with the gentler tasks, her presence making even hard work pleasant. They developed their own language, a combination of her written notes, expressive looks and gestures that became so natural Robert sometimes forgot she could not speak. Her eyes were indeed everything he needed. He could read her moods, her thoughts, her desires in those expressive green eyes. When she was happy, they sparkled. When she was sad, they darkened like a stormy sea. When she looked at him with love, they glowed. The people of Williams accepted Eleanor quickly. She attended church every Sunday with Robert, and the women of the town were kind to her, making sure to speak directly to her so she could read their lips, waiting patiently for her written responses. She joined the sewing circle, and her neat, beautiful stitching made her a valued member. Diego became a good friend to both of them. He was 24 years old, hardworking and honest, and he treated Eleanor with respectful affection, calling her Senora Boss and bringing her fresh eggs from his mother's chickens. Winter came and went, a cold season made warm by the love in the house. Robert and Eleanor grew closer with each passing day. They learned each other's rhythms, preferences, and dreams. On long winter evenings, they played checkers and card games, and Robert taught Eleanor to play chess, which she took to with enthusiasm, beating him soundly within a month. Spring arrived in 1883 with a profusion of wildflowers and new calves. It was in April that Eleanor realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but waited until she was certain before telling Robert. She chose the moment carefully, making his favorite meal and waiting until after they had eaten. Then she handed him a note with shaking hands. "Robert, we are going to have a child. I am 3 months along. Are you happy?" He read it twice, then looked at her with wonder dawning on his face. "A child. We are going to have a baby," she nodded, tears already streaming down her face, her smile radiant. Robert let out a whoop of joy that startled her, then swept her up in his arms and spun her around carefully before setting her down and dropping to his knees. He pressed his ear to her still flat belly and looked up at her with awe. "A baby," he breathed. "Our baby. Eleanor, I am happier than I knew a person could be." She ran her fingers through his hair, and he saw in her eyes that she felt the same. The pregnancy agreed with Eleanor. She glowed with health and happiness, and Robert became almost comically protective, insisting she rest more, not lift anything heavy, and eat plenty. She tolerated his fussing with patient amusement, writing him teasing notes about how women had been having babies since the beginning of time. In November of 1883, on a cold night with snow falling gently outside, Eleanor went into labor. Robert rode for the midwife in town, an experienced woman named Mrs. Foster, and then spent the longest hours of his life pacing in the main room while Eleanor labored in the bedroom. Mrs. Foster came out periodically to update him. "She is doing well. She is strong. It should not be much longer." Finally, near dawn, he heard the unmistakable cry of a newborn. He rushed to the bedroom door, and Mrs. Foster opened it with a smile. "You have a son, Mr. Zimmerman. A healthy, strong boy." Robert entered to find Eleanor propped up in bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle. She looked up at him with so much love and pride that he felt his throat close with emotion. He sat on the edge of the bed and looked down at his son. The baby had a red, wrinkled face, dark hair, and tiny, perfect fingers that gripped Robert's finger when he offered it. "He is perfect," Robert whispered. "You are amazing. I love you so much." Eleanor smiled and gestured to the notepad on the bedside table. He picked it up and saw she had written earlier, "If a boy, can we name him James after your brother who died in the war?" Robert's eyes filled with tears. He had told her about James months ago, his younger brother who had died at Gettysburg. "You would do that?" She nodded. "James Robert Zimmerman," Robert said. "It is perfect." The baby, young James, proved to be a good-natured child. He nursed well, slept reasonably, and seemed content to observe the world with serious blue eyes. Eleanor was a natural mother, patient and loving, and Robert discovered that fatherhood suited him. He loved holding his son, marveling at the tiny person they had created. The ranch prospered. Robert was able to hire another hand, expanding his herd and his operations. The house grew as well. Robert built an addition, adding 2 more bedrooms and expanding the kitchen. Eleanor filled the space with love and laughter, even if her laughter was silent. Robert learned to recognize it by the way her shoulders shook and her eyes crinkled. James learned to communicate with his mother naturally, understanding her gestures and reading her notes as soon as he could read. By the time he was 4, he would translate for her, sometimes when speaking to strangers. A tiny, serious boy explaining what his mama wanted to say. "Mama says thank you for the fabric, Mrs. Henderson. She says she will make you a nice quilt square in return." The townspeople found it charming, and James developed a protective streak toward his mother, quick to defend her if anyone seemed unkind, though such occasions were rare. In 1886, Eleanor gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Ruth, after Eleanor's mother. Ruth had her mother's auburn hair and green eyes, and she was a spirited, joyful child from the start. Where James was serious and thoughtful, Ruth was full of mischief and laughter. She adored her older brother and followed him everywhere. The Zimmerman Ranch became known throughout the territory as a prosperous, well-run operation. Robert's reputation for honesty and hard work spread, and he was often consulted by other ranchers. Eleanor's garden became famous in Williams, and she supplied vegetables to several families in town, trading for goods and services. On their 5th wedding anniversary, in July of 1887, Robert took Eleanor on a picnic to a beautiful spot on their land, a rise that overlooked the valley. They sat on a blanket, eating the lunch she had prepared, watching their children play nearby under Diego's watchful eye. "Do you remember when you first arrived?" Robert asked. "How frightened you looked stepping off that stage." Eleanor nodded and reached for her ever-present pad. "I remember everything about that day, how kind your eyes were, how you took my note without hesitation, how you made me feel safe for the first time in so long. I fell in love with you before we even reached the ranch," Robert confessed. "The way you smiled at the desert flowers, the way you looked at the house like it was a palace, I knew then that I wanted to spend every day of my life making you happy." Eleanor wrote quickly, "You have succeeded beyond measure. I never dreamed I could be this happy. You gave me a home, a family, a life. You loved me when I thought I was unlovable. Your eyes told me everything I needed to know from the beginning. They told me I was safe. They told me I was valued. They told me I was loved." Robert took her hand and raised it to his lips. "Your eyes told me the same. They still do. Every morning when I wake up next to you, I thank God for the day I placed that advertisement. Best decision I ever made." She leaned into him, and they sat together in comfortable silence, watching their children play, feeling the warm sun on their faces, content in the life they had built together. The years continued to pass in happiness. James grew tall and strong, learning the ranch work from his father and proving to have a gift with horses. Ruth was bright and quick-witted, learning to read and write early, often helping her mother with correspondence and shopping lists. In 1889, Eleanor gave birth to their 3rd child, another son they named William, after the town where their story began. William was a happy baby who grew into a sweet-natured boy, easygoing and affectionate. The ranch continued to expand. Robert bought adjacent land as it became available, and by 1890, he was running over 500 head of cattle and had gained a reputation for raising quality horses as well. He hired more help, including a young married couple who lived in a cabin on the property and helped with the house and the children. Eleanor remained Robert's partner in everything. She kept the books for the ranch, her precise handwriting and mathematical mind proving invaluable. She wrote letters for Robert when his rough wording needed softening, and she helped make decisions about the ranch's future. He valued her opinion and often said she was the smartest person he knew. The children adored both their parents. James, now a young man of 10 years old, was protective of his mother and respectful of his father. Ruth, 8 years old, was bright and cheerful, bringing joy to everyone around her. William, at 2 years old, was just beginning to talk and toddle around, getting into everything. In the spring of 1891, tragedy struck the territory. A drought began that would last for 3 years. Water became scarce and many ranchers struggled. Robert had planned well, however. His well was deep and reliable, and he had water rights to a creek that ran through his property. He was able to keep his herd alive, and he generously allowed neighbors to water their cattle at his creek, asking only that they help maintain the fences in return. This generosity earned him even more respect and friendship throughout the community. When the drought finally broke in 1894, the Zimmerman Ranch was one of the strongest in the territory, and Robert had become an informal leader among the ranchers. the man others came to for advice and help. Eleanor supported him through all of it, managing the household with efficiency even when supplies were scarce, finding ways to stretch their resources, and always offering comfort and encouragement when times were hard. Her notes to Robert during those difficult years sustained him. "We will get through this. We have each other, and that is everything. You are doing wonderfully. Everyone respects and admires you. I am so proud to be your wife. The children are fine. We are fine. Do not worry so much. We are strong together." In 1896, Arizona Territory was growing and changing. Talk of statehood was increasing, railroads were expanding, and the wild frontier was becoming more settled. James was now 14, nearly a man, working the ranch alongside his father. Ruth, at 12, was becoming a young lady, beautiful and intelligent. William, at 8, was growing like a weed and showing signs of having his father's strength and his mother's quick mind. Robert and Eleanor, now in their 40s, had grown even closer with the passage of time. Their love had matured from the passionate intensity of their early years into something deeper and more enduring. They could communicate with a glance across a room, and their partnership was so natural that it seemed they had been together forever, rather than just 14 years. One evening in the summer of 1896, after the children had gone to bed, Robert and Eleanor sat on the porch watching the sunset. The desert was painted in shades of pink and gold, and the air was finally cooling after the heat of the day. "I have been thinking," Robert said, "we should take a trip. Maybe to San Francisco. I have done well these past years, and you have never seen the ocean." Eleanor's eyes lit up with excitement. She wrote, "Can we really? What about the children and the ranch? Diego can manage for a few weeks. He is practically a partner now. James can help him. We could take the younger two with us or leave them with Diego's family. They love children." Eleanor wrote more slowly, "I would love to see the ocean. I would love to go anywhere with you, but what I love most is being right here with you in the life we have built. I do not need adventures far away. My greatest adventure has been loving you." Robert felt his throat tighten with emotion. After all these years, she could still move him to tears with her words. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Eleanor Zimmerman, the very best thing." She reached over and took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. They sat that way until the stars came out, content in the simple pleasure of being together. In 1898, war fever swept the nation. The Spanish-American War broke out and young men were eager to enlist. James, now 16, talked of joining up. Robert was firmly against it. "That is not our fight," he said. "You are needed here." But James was at that age where adventure called. Eleanor could see the longing in her son's eyes. One evening, she wrote a long letter to James, telling him about her childhood, about violence and loss, about the value of life and the cost of war. She told him about his father's experiences in the Civil War, things Robert rarely spoke of. She asked him to wait, to think, to consider what he would be giving up. James read the letter 3 times, then came to his mother and hugged her tightly. "I will wait, Mama, I promise." The war ended quickly, and James remained on the ranch. He grew into a fine young man, responsible and hardworking. By 1900, at 18, he was courting a girl from town, a sweet young woman named Sarah who was kind and gentle. Eleanor approved wholeheartedly. Ruth, at 16, had attracted the attention of several young men, but she was in no hurry to marry. She wanted to attend the normal school in Flagstaff and become a teacher. Robert and Eleanor supported her ambitions, proud of her intelligence and determination. William, at 12, was turning into a talented horseman, able to work with even the most difficult animals. He had his mother's patience and his father's strength, a powerful combination. The turn of the century brought changes. Arizona Territory continued to grow and modernize. Williams had electric lights now, and there was talk of paving the main street. Robert and Eleanor watched the changes with interest, but remained rooted in the life they loved. In 1902, James married Sarah in a beautiful ceremony at the Williams Church. Eleanor cried silent tears of joy as she watched her firstborn pledge his life to his bride. Robert built the young couple a house on the ranch property, and James officially became a partner in the operation. Sarah proved to be a wonderful addition to the family, treating Eleanor with affection and respect. Ruth left for normal school in Flagstaff in 1903, and the house felt emptier without her bright presence. But she wrote long letters home, which Eleanor treasured. Ruth graduated in 1905 and took a teaching position in Williams, moving back home to her parents' delight. William continued to work the ranch, showing no interest in leaving. He was happy with the land and the animals, finding satisfaction in the simple, hard work of ranching life. In 1905, Sarah gave birth to Robert and Eleanor's first grandchild, a boy they named Robert, after his grandfather. Holding his grandson, Robert felt the circle of life complete itself. He looked at Eleanor, who was watching him with shining eyes, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude for the life they had built. "We did well," he said softly. "We did very well indeed." Eleanor nodded, her eyes saying everything her voice never could. The years continued to pass in contentment. Ruth married a fellow teacher, a good man named Thomas Reid, in 1907. They built a house in town and soon had children of their own. William married in 1910, a rancher's daughter named Catherine who fit into the family seamlessly. Robert and Eleanor aged gracefully, their hair turning gray, their faces showing the lines of years spent in the sun and wind, but their love never dimming. If anything, it grew stronger. They were seldom apart, still preferring each other's company to anyone else's. On their 30th wedding anniversary in July of 1912, their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a celebration. There were now 5 grandchildren, with more on the way. The house rang with laughter and conversation, and the table groaned under the weight of food. As the party wound down and the sky darkened, Robert and Eleanor slipped away to their favorite spot on the rise overlooking the valley. They sat on the same blanket they had used on their 5th anniversary, looking out over the land they had built together. 30 years, Robert mused. It has gone so fast. It feels like yesterday that I watched you step off that stage, so small and scared and beautiful. Eleanor had her notepad as always. She wrote, "The best 30 years anyone could have. You kept every promise you made to me. You made me feel safe, valued, and loved every single day. You gave me a family, a home, and a life beyond my wildest dreams. I love you more now than I did then, which I would not have thought possible." Robert read the note by the light of the rising moon, then pulled her close. "Your eyes still tell me everything I need to know. They told me you loved me from the beginning, even when you were too scared to show it fully. They tell me now that you are happy, that you are content, that you have no regrets. Am I reading them correctly?" Eleanor nodded and kissed him softly. She pulled back and wrote one more line. "No regrets, only gratitude. You are my heart, Robert. You always will be." They sat together as the stars came out, surrounded by the land they had worked, beneath the sky that had witnessed their love story, grateful for every moment they had been given. The years moved on as years do. Robert and Eleanor remained active and involved in the ranch and the family, though they gradually handed over more responsibilities to James and William. They became beloved grandparents, always ready with a hug, a treat, or a story. In 1918, the world was gripped by war again, but their family was spared. James's oldest son was only 16, too young to enlist, and the war ended before he could join. The Spanish flu that followed was terrifying, but again their family was spared. Eleanor insisted on strict hygiene and limited contact with town during the worst of the outbreak, and her caution paid off. By 1920, Robert was 60 years old, and Eleanor was 47. They were still healthy and active, though Robert's joints ached more in the mornings, and Eleanor tired more easily. They had 9 grandchildren now, ranging from infant to teenager, and the joy these children brought them was immeasurable. Arizona achieved statehood in 1912, and Williams continued to grow. The railroad brought more people and more opportunities. The Zimmerman Ranch remained one of the most successful operations in the region, now run primarily by James and William, but still bearing their father's mark of integrity and hard work. Robert and Eleanor settled into a comfortable routine. They rose early out of habit, but their days were easier now. They tended Eleanor's garden together, took gentle rides around the property, and spent long evenings on the porch watching the sunsets they had loved for so many years. Eleanor's ability to write had never left her, and over the years, she had filled dozens of journals with her thoughts, observations, and memories. She wrote about her children and grandchildren, about the ranch, about the changing world around them. But mostly, she wrote about Robert, about the man who had taken a chance on a mute mail-order bride and given her everything she had ever wanted. In the summer of 1925, Robert became ill. It started as a cough that would not go away, and despite Eleanor's nursing and the doctor's care, he grew weaker. Pneumonia, the doctor said. At his age, it was serious. Eleanor rarely left his bedside. She wrote him notes constantly, reminding him of their life together, of all the happy memories, of all the people who loved him. She read to him from his favorite books and the Bible. She held his hand and willed him to fight. Robert recovered slowly, but the illness had taken its toll. He was frailer now, his hair completely white, his once strong frame thinner. But his mind was sharp, and his love for Eleanor was as strong as ever. "I am not ready to leave you yet," he told her when he was well enough to sit up. "We still have more sunsets to watch together." Eleanor cried and wrote, "I need you. I have needed you every day since I stepped off that stage in 1882. Do not leave me yet." "I will stay as long as I can," he promised. "I want to see our great-grandchildren. I want to grow old with you. I want every moment I can have." Robert did recover, though he was never quite as strong as before. But he was alive and present, and that was enough. He and Eleanor made the most of every day, cherishing the simple pleasures they had always loved. In 1927, their first great-grandchild was born, James's grandson. They held the tiny baby and marveled at the continuation of their legacy. Robert, at 67, and Eleanor, at 54, looked at each other over the baby's head and shared a smile of pure contentment. The years that followed were gentle ones. Robert and Eleanor remained at the heart of their family, the patriarch and matriarch whose love story had become legend in Williams. People spoke of the rancher and his mute wife, who communicated with looks and love, who had built an empire together, who remained devoted after nearly 50 years of marriage. In 1932, on their 50th wedding anniversary, the family threw an enormous celebration. Over 100 people attended, including 3 generations of Zimmermans and half the town of Williams. There were speeches and toasts, laughter and tears. When asked to speak, Robert stood with Eleanor at his side. "I am not much for speeches," he began, "but I want to say this. 50 years ago, I took a chance on a woman I had never met, who could not speak a word. Best decision I ever made. Eleanor has been my partner, my love, my best friend, and my inspiration. She never needed words to tell me everything I needed to know. Her eyes, her heart, her actions have spoken louder than any voice could. I love you, Eleanor. I have loved you for 50 years, and I will love you for whatever time we have left. Eleanor stood and wrote on a large paper so everyone could see. Robert gave me everything. A home, a family, safety, respect, and love. He saw past what I could not do and loved who I was. He has been my hero, my rock, and my heart for 50 years. I would choose him again every single day. I love you, my darling husband. There was not a dry eye in the gathering. Their children and grandchildren gathered around them, and the photograph taken that day would hang in the ranch house for generations. Robert and Eleanor were given 6 more years together. They watched their family continue to grow, saw their great-grandchildren begin to grow up, and enjoyed the respect and love of their community. They took walks together every day that weather permitted, Robert leaning more on his cane each year. Eleanor's hair now completely silver, but her eyes still bright green and expressive. They still slept curled together every night, still found joy in each other's presence, still communicated with the ease of 50 years of practice. Robert could interpret the slightest change in Eleanor's expression, and she knew his moods and thoughts as if they were her own. In the spring of 1938, Robert passed away peacefully in his sleep, 1 month before his 78th birthday. He went to bed with Eleanor beside him, kissed her good night as he had done for 56 years, and simply did not wake up. The doctor said it was his heart, worn out from a long life of hard work and deep love. Eleanor was devastated but not broken. She had known this day would come, had dreaded it, but she was sustained by the knowledge that she had been truly, deeply loved for more than half a century. She wrote in her journal the day Robert died, "He was my everything. He saved me in every way a person can be saved. I will love him until I draw my last breath and beyond. But I am not afraid. He taught me courage. He taught me strength. He taught me that love endures all things. I will carry him in my heart until we meet again." Eleanor lived another 7 years, surrounded by her family, still sharp-minded and involved in the ranch operations. She continued her garden, her sewing, and her journal writing. She was beloved by all who knew her, the matriarch who had started as a frightened mail order bride and become the cornerstone of a thriving family. She spoke often with her children and grandchildren about Robert, keeping his memory alive. She would point to her eyes and then her heart, and everyone knew she was saying that Robert had seen her heart from the beginning, and she had seen his. In the summer of 1945, Eleanor passed away peacefully, surrounded by her family. Her last act was to write a note to her children. "I am going to be with your father now. Take care of each other. Love deeply. Forgive quickly. And remember that the greatest adventures come from taking chances on love. I love you all." She was buried next to Robert in the Williams Cemetery beneath a headstone that read, "Robert and Eleanor Zimmerman." He heard her silence. She spoke with her eyes. They loved with their whole hearts, together forever. Their legacy lived on in the ranch, which remained in the family for generations. It lived on in their descendants, who carried forward the values of hard work, integrity, and deep love that Robert and Eleanor had exemplified. It lived on in the stories told in Williams about the rancher and his mute bride who built an empire together. But most of all, it lived on in the example they had set. That true communication comes from the heart, that love can overcome any obstacle, and that two people who commit to each other fully can build something beautiful that endures long after they are gone. The story of Robert and Eleanor Zimmerman became a beloved legend in Williams, Arizona, a testament to the power of love, the strength of partnership, and the truth that sometimes The most important things are communicated not through words, but through eyes that see the heart, hands that work together, and souls that recognize each other as home.